first of all, David, thanks for coming in and overarching being so open about a very intimate experience that you had. The purpose of this project is to get information like you're sharing out there, and it really is unique what you experienced to be able to showcase that to people in the form of a conversation, so we can have more information about rescues and the work that lifeguards do, and broaden the understanding from both sides. People that are going to the beach that don't understand necessarily what lifeguards do, but then also lifeguards understanding how it is on the other end. So just having this full understanding, which is what you're providing for us today. So once again, I'm just super grateful that you and I got a chance to meet.
Yeah.
And your openness to everything is just a source of learning for everybody to be able to put this stuff out there. So thanks for taking your time, and you just got done with work and you're spending an hour with me to have a chat. So I really want to, respect to you, and thanks for that. But let's start with, just tell me about yourself. I mean, where did you grow up? How did we get to this point? Like who are you specifically?
I grew up in Santa Ana, so I'm Orange County native my whole life. Grew up going to the beach. I work in Santa Ana now. I live in Anaheim. I'm an elementary school teacher. I'm 30 years old. I'm an uncle, brother, a nephew. I'm a partner. That's kind of me in a nutshell.
Yeah, nice. And what was your beach experience, ocean experience, swimming experience growing up? Like when did you learn how to swim, or anything just water related?
Yeah, I actually learned how to swim in a backyard pool. Just at my parents' house, we would have like those blow-up pools every summer. As far as going to the beach, we'd probably go maybe once or twice every summer. But I think as far as going deep into the water, we would just maybe put our feet in and then go back. I think my parents were very scared about us going further into the water. I think it wasn't until maybe college that I actually started to wade in deeper, maybe go a little bit past the waves, go under the waves. But I would say for the most part, I was more of a shore sand person.
Sure. And what was your family's approach or understanding? Like when you would show up to the beach, was there like a, hey, don't go past your knees? Or what was like the general take in your like growing up towards the ocean or towards water?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was seen as dangerous. So definitely stay within, sight lines and make sure that you're not going maybe past your knees. There was always an adult with us or someone close by just in case watching us. But that was kind of like our limit that we could go in.
Yeah. And what about your parents? Swimming ability or relationship with the ocean or water itself?
They wouldn't go in at all. I think they would go with their feet, but they were not swimmers. I think they had basic swimming abilities, but not as far as like being able to swim in the ocean. Maybe wading in a pool.
And what was their, do you care to share their jobs growing up or what they did and kind of how they grew up with that as well?
Yeah, so my parents grew up in Mexico. My mom works as a housekeeper. My dad works as a landscaper. So I think the ocean was something more for like summer breaks and vacations type of situation. But I don't think they had a lot of experience with the ocean. In the part of Mexico they grew up in was landlocked. So they didn't really have a lot of experience with bodies of water.
Yeah, and they immigrated here, and then you were born here in the U.S. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. But they saw a need to, they taught you how to swim and everything, and then you had a pool or someone else's pool?
We would just have like the blow-up pools in the backyard. We had cousins who had pools. We would go over there. And I think it was more of like, we would all either learn how to swim through each other or through neighbors, just by going in the water. And the pool wasn't that deep, so we were able to kind of felt more confident exploring in the pool, because it wasn't so deep.
Yeah, and it's a controlled environment,
Yeah.
right? You know that there's not going to be a shark in there or somewhere.
Yeah.
You can see there's no waves, right? And
Yeah.
and you can push your limits as a kid or whatever as you're experimenting or learning.
Yeah.
Cool. The reason I ask that is just because it's important. I think that represents a majority of people's relationship to water and learning how to swim and having access to some type of pool or controlled environment where you could learn that and having someone to teach you. I mean, we're talking as a global outlook on swimming ability and stuff. Most people have a interesting, less intimate relationship with water based on most of the places are also landlocked too, right? And then what about your perception or knowledge of lifeguards? Growing up, going to the beach, you said a couple times a summer. What do you remember about your viewpoint towards lifeguards, awareness of them at the beach when you went? Did your parents say, hey, make sure to go talk to the lifeguard?
I think we would see them, they would be driving in their truck, or we would see them in the tower. But we didn't really interact with them, I feel, unless they were coming by to say announcements about, the tides are high or, tide time. But I think as far as talking to them or really knowing what they do, it was kind of like the separation. We're at the ocean, they're at the ocean. We know they're here to help people and save people, but unless you're in need, then they're kind of doing their own thing and you're doing your own thing.
Yeah. And did you ever get a chance to see a lifeguard perform any specific thing, or was it just, hey, they're standing in the tower, they're in the truck? Did you ever see a specific instance before?
No, I'd never seen anyone be saved or, them going into action.
Okay. Cool. And so the day in question that we're going to end up talking about, so walk me through, because basically you ended up getting rescued by Newport Beach Lifeguards. Talk to me about that day, what it looked like when you were going to the beach, and what was the occasion, and who was with you. And
Yeah. I was with my friends. We were going to celebrate her birthday. We set up on the beach. It was sunny. It had been cloudy that morning, and the sun opened up. It was beautiful. We set up camp. We got our food ready, and then we went out into the ocean. The waves were strong that day, it felt. We had gone to the beach the day before, actually, but we went to Bolsa Chica State Beach. And I had gotten into the water, no problem. I was out there waiting in the water. And when this day at the Newport Beach, I could feel the tide or the waves pulling me further into the ocean. But then I felt like, okay, I'm confident. I felt good. I felt like I could keep going. I got to the point where there was a big wave coming, and I thought, okay, I need to go under it so I don't get knocked over.
Sorry to interrupt before you go into the specifics, but did you guys have, was there anyone that day within your friends and stuff that was like, oh man, the waves are really big, I don't want to go in? Or was it just like, oh yeah, they're bigger than normal, but we're all good, we're going to jump in, it's hot? What was the approach just generally?
It's interesting you asked that, because as I was reflecting on that, I realized that maybe there was a handful of us that got in there, and there was a lot of people who kind of were like, I'm going to stay on the shore because it's a little bit too strong.
And how many people total were there about?
Like 8.
Okay, so about a decent-sized group, and you guys are celebrating together. Okay.
Yeah. So this giant wave was coming, and I felt like, okay, I have to go under it, and then I'll just pop up at the end. The wave came, I went under, but then I started to roll under the water. It kept pushing me down. And then I would kick up towards the surface, and I felt like, okay, I'm going to reach the surface. And then another wave would come and bring me back down. And I couldn't fight it. Eventually, I was able to kind of, I guess, be pulled in so far that the waves they had passed the waves already. But at that point, I was so exhausted that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get back. I wasn't going to be able to swim back on my own. I was choking up water at this point.
And so you went from a place of touching, being shallow, a wave broke, which then you couldn't touch at a point. and then that you hit that rhythm of every time you tried to come up for a breath, another one crashed on top of you.
Yeah.
Okay. And now you're at a point where you're not touching and you're out, but you have this relief. You're at the surface of the water and you're able to regain like a moment of air.
Yeah. So I was able to breathe, but I think I was just so exhausted by being thrown around basically by the ocean that I knew that I wasn't going to be able to get back to the shore. So I was coughing up a lot of water. I was getting tired. I was, kicking and paddling with my arms, and I felt like I just started yelling, "Help, help, help." And there was other friends who were, close to me, so I assumed if I'm here, they're somewhere out there as well.
And how long was that period? Like, how many waves did you take on the head from standing to this moment where you're yelling for help? Like, what period of time do you think that spanned?
It felt like forever. It probably was like 3 to 4, I would say. But in that moment when I was underwater, I was like aware enough to know what was happening. And I was like, I'm going to drown. This is it. This is how I'm going to go out. And I think it was obviously a very scary thing to go through. And I'm still working through that in therapy and stuff. But there was that moment under the water where I was like, oh, no one's going to get to me on time.
And this was within that span of 4 waves.
Yeah. I was trying to reach up for that air, but every time I tried, you couldn't. I think usually when you're like in a pool or something like that and, you breach the water, that air is coming. And I was waiting for that. I was hopeful that was going to happen. And every time it didn't happen, I could feel my breath starting to run out.
Yeah. And it's a very primal portion within us when you have that need to breathe. And you usually expect, like in a controlled water environment, you have that expectation. Well, if I resurface, I can breathe. There's no problem. I just need a little extra time maybe to kick up if it's deeper. But in a spot, and you were in a rip current that day as well, right? So you were actually also getting pulled into a deeper zone.
Yeah.
But the waves were breaking, so you get caught up in this in-between zone where you're moving further out, but then also getting, repetitively slammed. And it activates a definite fight or flight response, right? Which is what I'm hearing that you experienced. Where was the tipping point and where was your mind going? I mean, you said you felt like you were going to drown. This is it. I mean, we're talking 4 waves. That's less than a minute, less than maybe even 30 seconds, depending on the wave interval for that day. Where did your mind specifically go in that moment? Did you have any other thoughts, or were you just solely focused on getting to the surface and getting a breath in?
I would say it was a combination of feeling, this is how I go, and also feeling like I need to keep kicking. There's a chance that I could still, get to the surface, and then once I get to the surface, I'll figure out what to do next, whether it's, waiting on my back or I had always seen these videos and learned, if there's a rip current, you swim parallel to the shore and you go. So I knew that, but in that moment, that was gone.
Sure. When you did resurface, do you remember what you were intaking visually? Like, were you able to look at the shore and know where you were in a relationship to it, or were you still kind of figuring out getting your bearings when you actually did get up for that breath before you started yelling for help?
Yeah, I was able to, I think I was facing out into the ocean and I was able to turn and I could see the shore and I could see, people that I knew on the shore looking at me, and I could feel myself still being pulled, further out. And I think that's when I was like, I'm not going to be able to get back there. So I just got to yell and hope that, the vessel will hear me and they'll come get me. I had seen them kind of going back and forth earlier. I didn't know where they were.
The lifeguard vessel, lifeguard boat. Okay.
So I think when we were, we talked to them, I was able to meet them, and they let me know that the reason they came to our area is because they heard me yelling. And I think that was so moving for me because I didn't realize like, oh, they came because they heard me. Otherwise, if I hadn't yelled or, they wouldn't have made their way over. And I wasn't the only one who was rescued on the vessel. There was, I think, maybe 4 or 5 other people.
Yeah, they were actively making other rescues in the area, right? And then you got plugged into that situation. Because I think there was, if I remember correctly, just from piecing together the conversation we had before, is there was a lot of stuff going on in that area because there was a set of waves and a lot of other people were getting rescued and the deckhands were off, and which is a dynamic environment for just a couple lifeguards to start navigating who are we going to, where first, etc. Okay, and what about, your friends? Did you talk to any of them or did they, in this moment where you've come up now, you're yelling for help, lifeguards obviously are going to recognize that. Did your friends hear you? Did you talk to them? Did they notice what was going on? Did they also get trapped in that situation? Or
the ones who were on the shore were able to notice that something was going wrong. They couldn't see us. There was a couple of 2 other friends, I would say, kind of caught up in the rip current. One was able to kind of swim away from it parallel and eventually was able to make it back to shore. The other one was rescued on the vessel as well with me. But they couldn't tell what was happening from the shore. They knew that the vessel was there. They knew people were being pulled onto the vessel, but they didn't know if it was me, if it was a stranger, right? So at that point, there was a lot of confusion, a lot of fear about who made it and what is the condition of, how they are.
Yeah. And so what happens next now? The lifeguard vessel comes over and...
someone jumps into the water, they tie the buoy around me, pull me onto the boat. I'm sitting on the boat and I am like shell shocked. I am looking across at my friend and I'm staring at her, but I cannot respond. I'm choking up water, I'm gagging, I'm out of breath, but I'm in here. I cannot think, I cannot respond to people. Eventually, Brandon, who was on the boat, he was a lifeguard, he kind of said, "Hey," and I turned over and I looked at him and I kind of snapped back and I was like, I'm alive, I'm here, I'm safe, they're gonna, they're here to save me, we're gonna be good. But it's still, I was shocked, I think. They then had us go back into the water. They kind of brought us as close as they could so we could get to the shore. And they said, okay, now we're going back into the water. And I was like, I can't do that. After what I just experienced, that is the last thing I want to do. If I could have spoken up, I would have been like, can we go to a dock?
Way, right?
Yeah, is there a dock we can go to or something? But in that moment, there's no choice. I knew I had to do what they were telling me to do. And I had to trust that they knew what they were doing, and I just had to go along with it.
Yeah, and an interesting intersection of, from the lifeguard perspective, right? That is a quick decision where there's multiple ways to extricate a victim from the water when you're using a lifeguard vessel, but the quickest when you have multiple there is to just get to a spot that's safe and calm, where for a lifeguard they know they can safely navigate, bring someone back in, and get them immediately back to the shore. Whereas a dock would mean where now they're in a location, right, of multiple rescues happening in the area, multiple rip currents, multiple people. Like you said, hey, I saw them over here, but then I was yelling for help over here while they were rescuing people over there, right? So they have to triage this amazing amount of stuff that's going on in split-second decisions while still maintaining focus. So to drop someone off in a calmer spot, get them straight back to the shore and get back to business is the number one priority for the lifeguards, especially it was a day with larger surf, lots of rip currents, huge visitation. I mean, it was like the trifecta of a proper day of lifeguarding that day. But here you are, arguably, and correct me once again if I'm wrong, arguably one of the most intimate experiences you've just had in your entire life, which pulled you from a birthday celebration with your friends at the beach, which is like the last thing you're thinking about is drowning. And within a series of, 4 waves, let's call it 30 seconds to a minute, you just get flushed into this moment of thinking that you're going to drown. And now they go, well, we got to go back in the water. So that's, I think, an important detail where lifeguards don't get the feedback, or sometimes we don't get the choice to get that debrief in that moment where, hey, I wanted to speak up, but you're still processing. I mean, you're actively probably still just trying to breathe, right? And I think you had a moment where you aspirated some water as well into your lung. We'll get into that. But I just wanted to comment on that real quick, because that is such a complex issue that I think between our operations and then taking care of people and their needs, there's this weird balance of where we're managing the stuff and puts everyone in a tough position. But yeah, really good feedback. Just that little detail there for lifeguards to know, hey, maybe take an extra second with this person, or ask, or maybe you could stay on the boat longer or something. But every situation is going to be different. But I think that's a very, very important detail. So cool. Let's get back into, you're on the boat and they're going, hey, we're going to go back in so we can get you to the shore, right? So walk me through how that continues.
So I got up, towards the rear of the vessel, and they said, okay, jump in. And I just stayed there, and they were like, okay, you got to jump in. And I said, I can't hesitate again. I got to do it. So I jumped in. The 2 lifeguards came, they tried to put the buoy around me. They're like, all right, we're going to go in together. So then, I was linking arms with both of them, and then a wave came, and it was like a gnarly wave. So I felt like, oh, okay, I'm just going to be right back in what I was, 2 minutes ago. And then it passed, and then they were like, another one is coming. And I didn't remember this, but when the lifeguards told me that, I was like, no, like I was saying no. I was tired at that point. I was exhausted. And they, we got through it. We got to the shore. They walked me straight to the truck, the lifeguard truck, and then sat me in the back. And they decided that I needed more help, so they called an ambulance. I kept choking up water. I kept, spitting it up. So they were worried that I had inhaled water at that point.
Yeah. And how did you feel at that point once you were back to the shore? Do you remember having any trouble breathing or all this coughing stuff? Were you worried about the way you're breathing, or what was your kind of focus? Were you like, hey, where are my friends? Like, what's your thought process? You're back on shore now, to safety at least. Yeah. You're obviously exhausted, but what else? I mean, where's your mind at that point?
I think it was just a lot of unknown. Hadn't experienced anything like this before, so I noticed that I was coughing up a lot and gagging a lot. So I thought, okay, there's certainly water in my lungs, or something's going to happen if they feel like if I need to, be taken by an ambulance. So then, as we're walking to the truck, I think I'm thinking about several things. I think I'm thinking about, am I okay? Am I going to be okay? I've never had to take a ride in an ambulance before. What is that going to be like? I'm thinking about the celebration that we were having, and now it's ending in me going home in an ambulance, right? I'm thinking about, other people. Did they make it? Are they okay? Where are they? So there's just a lot going through my mind at that time.
Mm-hmm. And and operationally, once again, just for context for other people that are listening, maybe that not lifeguards and stuff, at this point, if a lifeguard notices that someone's having trouble breathing, they're continuously coughing up water, right? There's 2 places for water to go. It's either in your lungs or your stomach, whether you swallow it or you aspirate it, right? If you're coughing, that's indicating that you've got some fluid potentially in your lungs, and the best way to get that checked out is through an ambulance or paramedics, right? So at that point, those guys were definitely assessing you medically to make sure, hey, let's double check to make sure, like you're saying, with the same worry, am I going to be okay from this point forward? I mean, I'm out of the water, but there's still other complications. And drowning also, by definition, is just respiratory impairment from submersion or immersion in liquid, meaning if I aspirated the water I have sitting here to, right now, my lungs can actually release fluid after the fact, even on dry land, and that's technically drowning because the fluid fills up your lungs. it blocks the way that your body takes in oxygen. Now you're actually still technically drowning.
Yeah.
So, once again, a good call on their part to go, hey, let's get the ambulance here to be extra certain. And then that's where you and I first met without meeting, right? Because I was in that truck, one of the trucks that came to, the truck that came to pick you up or supplement that rescue, because there was multiple victims, et cetera. And just for people to know, so that I was taking photos for the Lifeguard project and got a shot of you in that moment with Brandon in the back of the truck and you getting loaded in the ambulance. And the interesting thing for me about this and the project and putting out this media out there is you wanted to reach out because, and I don't want to, take your thunder from telling the rest of the rescue story, but that's how we got involved, is because of this photo. You reached out through Instagram and however the connections worked out, because you wanted to thank the lifeguards, right? Let's finish out how that, so people aren't left hanging with how that ambulance portion goes and what happened, and then I want you to touch on that once you finish out what you remember with getting checked out by the medics, because you didn't end up getting transported, correct?
Yeah.
So walk me through that last little step, and then tell me that aftermath of reaching out and that whole process through your perspective.
Yeah, so we were on the truck. Brandon was with me. He started taking vital signs. He was taking my blood pressure, my pulse, listening to my lungs, listening to the back. And I remember just being so impressed, because I was like, oh, they know so much. Like they're taking me to the EMTs, taking me to the ambulance, but he's already gonna deliver me with like, this is what I have, this is what I know, this is my age, like all this information that I had given them either on the vessel or as we were in the truck on our way to the ambulance. All this information he had already gotten, so that when he handed me over to the EMTs, it was a seamless experience. They were like, okay, Brandon gave us all the information, we're gonna take you, load you in the back, we're gonna check you out as well. And then, it was just so amazing to me that was going on. That made me feel really safe. Eventually the EMTs checked me out. At that point I started to vomit. So at that point it wasn't just, I was just anxious at that point as well. So I just started to throw up in the truck.
And probably swallowed a significant amount of salt water as well.
Yeah. And they, said I was fine. I didn't have, water in my lungs, and that, was a relief, but I could still feel like there's water in my nose. There's water. I could taste the water, So then they said, we could take you to the hospital, or we can take you home, or you can go home. And I was like, I want to go home. The last thing I want to do is I just want to be in my bed, or I want to be in my bed. I want to be comfortable. Like, I want to feel safe. And to me, that is what I needed, is to be at home in bed. So when I did get home, I showered and I slept a lot. Eventually I had this moment where I was like, I didn't say thank you to anyone in that moment. And I was like, maybe I can figure out who they are. So I went online and I saw that picture that you had taken of us, and I could see Brandon's face in there, and his face was a little blurry. And I was like, okay, I have an old coworker who was a lifeguard, and she was a lifeguard at Crystal Cove, St. Beach. And I was like, what are the odds that maybe she knows who this is? So I messaged her on Instagram and I said, hey, do you know who this is? She said, no, I don't. Let me ask around. And 2 minutes later, she's like, oh, wait, I know who that is. That's Brandon. And so then, eventually she was like, someone's going to message you from the Lifeguard project, and they just want to talk. And I was like, okay, I'm totally down. But what I really wanted was to be able to reach out, to him or his captain or other people who were on the vessel who, helped, so that we could connect, just so I could say thank you, right?
And that's huge. And we did connect, right? And we sat down and had a chat with all three of the lifeguards that were involved in the rescue that day. And the impressive thing to me, right, without having them in this interview here, but each and every one of them in their entire career hadn't had the chance to actually talk to a victim that they rescued, because as described from your perspective here, these things happen so quick, they're so dynamic, and boom, on a busy day, you're on to the next rescue. But this is why it's so important to share your perspective, because look how much there is to unpack there and how much can happen. What was the overall thing? Maybe 10 minutes? I mean, it's incredible how quickly life can decide something like that in the ocean environment. And on behalf of lifeguarding, right? I mean, the ocean is to be respected because of this insane power that exists within it. And once again, I mean, my heart goes out to you and your approach to this in giving those lifeguards the feedback of a thank you, because it does go a long way. And having that insight, I mean, you're processing, once again, this incredible moment, but you were wanting to go above and beyond and say, hey guys, like, just thanks, right? And meet them, which is, I think, valuable for both sides of people to understand and unpack what happened.
Yeah. I mean, I almost felt selfish because I was like, I need to say thank you for me, like, to be able to move on from this, or to, you know, feel some sort of closure from this, because like you said, it was a very intimate thing that happened so quickly, and then they have to go, they got other people they got to, you know, rescue. And so I think for me, it was just so big, and obviously it's going to leave a huge impression on my life and moving forward, and my relationship with the ocean and my respect for the ocean. And I think that just being able to reach out to them and have that conversation with them and listen to their side of the story, of what they saw on their side, and be able to share what I was going through and what I was experiencing, and letting them know, like, I saw the stats for that day. You know, there were so many people who were rescued, so many people who received medical attention, and I was just one of those people. And to me, like, this changed my entire life. And like, I had told Brandon, I wrote him a letter and I said, you know, you're going to save hundreds of thousands of people, but like, I am always going to remember your face on the vessel. I'm going to remember that moment forever. And, you know, you might not, might be other people, other things that stick out to you that you remember in your career. But like, I need you to know that, like, you saved me, the other guys as well, you know, you guys touched my life. And like, I feel like indebted to them, right? And, you know, I talked to you, I'm like, I feel like I'll never be able to say thank you enough, right? Because they were able to give me back something that my life, right? They were able to keep that with me. So I think it's just something it's such a intimate relationship, really, you know, that no one knows what we experience except us.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. And that is absolutely true. And I don't want to speak for those guys, but we all had that conversation where we did our little briefing, which was really amazing. And I want to get your perspective on that. But that's why lifeguards do the job, right? We want people to go to the beach and have a good time. But when these split-second moments happen, and this is what the ocean affords us, is these unknowns, we're there to make that exchange. And those guys don't need a thank you. They know, right? And like you said, you guys just got thrust into this relationship that is the exchange of that moment, which you can't forget, right? And those are the times that all the training, all the things we do, like, that is the essence of a job, of the job, right? So that's you both. Very well said on your end. And I think it's so important to have that perspective, because like you said, you looked at the stat, and it was that, when I was writing around, that was one of the most incredible days of lifeguarding I had seen, and I've worked for over 15 years. Swell, heat, crowds, and not to mention is Ben Carlson Day, which you also ended up getting the information on that as well, right? As you were trying to find out what was going on with the Newport Lifeguards and stuff. Yeah. Well, let's talk about that for a second too, because I think that's an interesting additional detail for when this happened.
Yeah, it was July 6th. You know, when I was looking to see if I could connect with the Newport Beach Lifeguards, I kept seeing the posts about Ben Carlson, and I started to look into it and the foundation, and I was like, oh my, this was the anniversary. Today was the anniversary. So I felt such a deep personal connection. I felt, you know, so moved by what happened that day. And, you know, the fact that some of the people who were on the vessel, it was their day off. they were there because this is a day that's so special, for everyone. And so to me, it just felt like just this connection where I felt so connected to what had happened that day, that I needed to reach out for sure to, let them know that I was thinking about them and thinking about what had happened.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me that you realized you had this moment, and once again, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had this moment, you reached out and you're like, wait, like there's a lifeguard who did a rescue and died from doing a rescue.
Yeah.
And that was a whole nother factor for you going, man, these guys, what they're doing. And you did research when we chatted initially, you did some research on that and you started finding about lifeguarding itself, right?
Yeah.
And here you are learning from this exchange, trying to figure out what the heck's going on, contemplating your life. And just so many factors involved, but I think that's what makes this rescue so unique and special on all those. I mean, yeah, the timing of the anniversary, that day just happened to be swell and all that stuff. And these are the more things that get me thinking into that more spiritual realm of what if and the purpose behind life and meaning and all that stuff. But without digressing into that, I think the fact that you're open to it, once again, we can tie all that stuff together and everyone's going to learn from this, right? Like hearing your perspective, I can tell you right now, lifeguards listening and go, man, I wonder how many of my rescues that I didn't get a chance to talk to someone who had this same effect. And there's data, which we spoke about, one of the people I had on the podcast, Will Kuhn, studies they're doing with data with people that go home. And I mean, this changes their life. Yeah. And we talked about it a little bit. And if you care to share some of those thoughts you had afterwards, right? You were talking about going in the shower. You mentioned maybe therapy as well. And some of the things you were thinking about now a few days later. Yeah. Let's go into that a little bit if you're all right with that.
Yeah. So, even that day when I got home, I was showering and I felt so uncomfortable. I didn't want to be in the water. I didn't want it to go over my head. My nose was dripping water for the next couple of days. And I could feel my chest feel so tight. And I kept, going back to that moment when I was in the water, when I was being pulled under. And so I think, the next couple of days were really tough in terms of physically exhausting, mentally exhausting, just thinking about what could have happened, what did happen, processing, feeling an immense sense of guilt for being caught in, a rip current. And it wasn't, right, these things happen. I couldn't control it, but I felt such guilt because I was caught in that, I put these lifeguards in this situation, which I know that's, this is their career. This is what they train for. But I felt such embarrassment because I was like, had I not been in there, had I been honest with my ability as a swimmer, I wouldn't have gone all the way in there. I shouldn't have been all the way in there. So I think there was a bit of shame in there as well, as I was processing what it was like, to still be here.
Yeah, and that's perfectly natural, and we see it all the time, lifeguard. And this is why those thank yous don't happen, because people are processing as they're exiting a rescue. They're not to mention the whole beach is watching. Yeah, right. Like you're in the public. Yeah. So there is this immense sense when someone does get rescued by a lifeguard of, let's say it's even not to the extreme of where they thought they were going to drown, but just a basic I'm calling rescue. In quotes, where it's not as extreme, right? They weren't going underwater, they weren't swallowing water, but they were in a dangerous situation. Yeah, I mean, you get brought on, everyone at the beach is looking at you because the lifeguard just went out to do something. It is natural to feel, oh man, and I think that's something we need to work on in the profession, in either educating people or people knowing, and once again, just by sharing this stuff like you are, to go, hey, it's okay. That's what we signed up to do, right? That's what we're trained to do. This is our purpose. You're justifying our purpose by being here because it happened. And guess what? In the end, it's out of everyone's control where the rip current pops up. Yeah. So it's not anyone's fault. And so, take the little bit of load off your shoulders. But yeah, all those feelings are natural, but it's hard to think about that in the moment, right? Because it takes time to then process looking back.
Yeah. And the weeks past that, it was a lot of even just going into a pool. I was like, I can never do that. I was eventually able to go in, on the shallow side, sitting down on the steps, and that's kind of where I'm comfortable right now. I'm not ready to go into the ocean, and I'm working on that in therapy right now. It's just thinking about the effects of the drowning and the rescuing and what that did for my relationship with water and the ocean, but also my relationship with life and death. So I think it's left such a huge impact on me. And the weeks after the rescue, it was like I had this sense of like, I made it. So I'm going to live my life. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to go do that, because I could have not been here today. And eventually that goes away, and then it's kind of like, oh, I'm not really processing what happened. I'm just saying like, you only live once. Let me just do what I want to do. And through therapy, I've been able to tap further into what that means in terms of like understanding my relationship with death and life, and what it's like to come close to it and feel like, what do I do now? It's very philosophical. You start to get into that mindset. So I think in the post, it's been a lot of recognizing that I'm safe. What happened? I'm okay now. Thankfully, no problems physically. I'm working on the mental aspect. I was able to get a huge amount of closure by being able to talk to the lifeguards themselves and listen to their side. And, just that exchange, I think, was so healing in a way that I didn't realize it was going to be so healing in the moment. But,
Awesome.
Looking back on it, I know that it was such a huge part in me being able to move on.
Cool. And now we're about 3 months, actually,
Yep.
right, away from when it happened. Anything that, just since you and I spoke, because we've been kind of keeping in touch, anything else that's come up that we haven't talked about in this space away from that moment? Because when we sat down with the guards, because you and I chatted, hey, do you want to talk to these guys? And we set up a whole sit down kind of briefing, which was really, really cool to be a part of. But that was still pretty recent, right?
Yeah.
That was within a couple weeks of when it happened.
Yeah.
Anything to share in that longer term besides what you already just mentioned?
I mean, I feel like I have been more vocal about lifeguards. I feel like I've been telling people at school, what happened over the summer and what I went through. And, I want to get lifeguards to come visit our school to talk about safety. And, can I set up a workshop with parents so that they can experience speaking to a lifeguard and, what's their perspective, whether it's at a public pool or at the ocean, So I think that it has kind of revolutionized the way I'm like approaching talking about lifeguards, because, it sucks that it had to be this way, that I had to go through this to feel this like, respect towards them. But I definitely feel like since then I'm very vocal about it. And, in my class, I teach first grade. We do a lot of community helpers and stuff like that. So, the other day we were filling out a bubble map, about different people who help in our community. And one of my students said lifeguards. And I was like, oh, like, that's great, because, we live in Orange County. Some of the students have experience with the beach, but I can't say too many have experiences with lifeguards. So it was just kind of nice. And I haven't told them what happened, but, my plan is to invite some of the lifeguards to come over to school and kind of just share what they do. But it was nice to kind of see that they're also thinking about people that maybe haven't touched their lives yet or at all, but they know that are out there.
That's awesome. And yeah, absolutely. That's not the first career you think about that shows up to the career day at school. So how cool to have someone who's teaching first grade, to have that as an advocate, right? And I love that approach. Once again, and let me know anytime you need a lifeguard to come talk. I'm pretty sure I got all the connections to bring one whatever day, right? But that's so important and hey, that might translate to if you are advocating for it in the class, and then the kids might tell their parents, oh, let's talk to the lifeguard before we go and post our stuff up on the beach here. And it leads to safety. It leads to, hopefully, like you said, unfortunately, I had to go through this experience to get to that realization. Well, hopefully this leads to, hey, maybe they chat with the lifeguard before they go into that, and then they realize they're learning something or whatever it might be. You don't know the the effect that it can have,
Yeah.
right? But it's important, once again, that's why I'm doing this whole project, is to get that information out there so we don't have to experience it through this way.
Yeah.
Right? Although that is the quickest path to doing it, unfortunately. Do you think have you shared this with your family? Have you shared it with coworkers? Or, you said you didn't want to tell it to the students, but obviously it's a difficult thing to articulate.
Yeah.
You got to spend time talking about it.
Yeah.
You got to relive it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Who have you told? Where does that stand as far as?
Yeah, I mean, I waited a while to tell my parents and even my siblings, just because I knew that it was a very serious thing. But part of me was like, if I tell them, they're going to freak out and they're going to go to the worst. And so it took a couple of weeks, I think, to finally be like, hey, so this happened to me a month ago, and this is what happened. This was the experience I had. I'm okay. I'm fine. I'm working through it. Thankfully, I'm physically healthy. I'm okay. But I just want to let you know. And of course, they were like, why didn't you tell us? Why didn't you tell us? And I was like, I just didn't want to worry you. And that was just my own personal experience with it. I've now I'm kind of feel more comfortable telling people. So, some coworkers at school, I'm able to be like, hey, I'm recording a podcast today. And they're like, for what? And I'm like, well, and then here's a long story, and then I feel more kind of empowered telling the story because I feel like the way that it's affected me, I'm able to then share that with other people who might have not given a second thought to the lifeguards at the beach, or I'm just going to go into the deep end and I'll be fine. I think if I could give anyone just that extra bit of like pause or knowledge about what lifeguards do and are able to do, that then, that's like the best I could hope for, is that I'm impacting other people the way I was impacted.
Yeah, and look, I'm going to tell you straight up right now, 100% you will with this conversation, because this is a rare occurrence to be able to have this fully recorded and put out there for all the lifeguards now can learn from this one rescue, which represents a majority of the rescues we do, especially in Southern California. I mean, a rip current rescue like this is the basic structure and the meat and potatoes of what we do as lifeguards in this region of California. Yeah. And so, think about new lifeguards that are just starting out in academy, right? That they can now listen to this before they go to their lifeguard training, or even people in the fire department that have rescue swimmers and stuff that they're not dealing with it every single day. Or there's a plethora of ways that but the essence of it, once again, I just keep reiterating, is learning. Yeah. And sharing that perspective, which not just that, but other people that have been rescued, he felt the same way I did when I did that. I haven't talked to, there's probably people out there that have not talked to anyone about their moment like that they shared that's similar to this. And so your ability to share that can empower them to maybe do that as well, right? So that we'll never know the full impact, but 100%, that's why, this is important. From that, now that we have a little time from when we sat down with, it was Brendan, Brandon, and James, right? And they were, I forgot I know Brandon was working, but some of them were off duty because they were there for the Ben Carlson day, and they happened to come in to assist because it was so busy. But you were able to sit down with all three of them and debrief and talk about it with them and get the perspective. Now that you've had some time, in reflection, in hindsight, what did you gain from that? Or what do you remember that you took away from their perspective on all this and that kind of debrief that we had?
Yeah, I mean, because they were so alert and conscious and in the moment in the rescue, they were able to give me insight into what was going on maybe while I was frozen or in shock, right? And they were able to tell me, when we went in the water the second time, you were like grunting and you were like displeased, obviously, that you were going back in the water. And naturally. I didn't remember that. And I was like, and a big thing was like, for the longest time, I could only remember Brandon and his face. And it wasn't until we got together that I realized like, this person pulled me out and this person was also with me on the shore. And this person, like, I think in those moments, I can understand why someone might not be able to find their lifeguard who saved them, because if you're in shock and you don't have something like a face to remember or a name, like, and you go away, you might never have that opportunity again. Like I had to really dive. Like I was on Instagram, like looking around at posts, looking at tagged, photos, because I needed to find that person. Right. So I think that in being able to have that conversation with them, I was able to have a sense of closure with them, understand their perspective, and even just like some things that I felt maybe silly about. Like I felt, I put them in that situation. That's my fault. I was like, you guys don't hate me? And they're like, no, of course not. Obviously this is their job. But silly things like that to me, I was like, as I was reaching out, I was like, ooh, what if they're like, oh, this guy who made us go into the rip current, right?
Sure.
So I think there was these, to me, silly thoughts that now I was able to kind of, this is what they do. They're professionals. They're used to this. They know what they got to do. I feel better about the experience. I feel like I, might have been just one of those in the day, one of the rescues in the day, but that doesn't mean that I was, I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I'm losing my train of thought.
That's all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you had, from what I remember in that moment too, there was a lot of things where you thought that they were issues with them, and they're going, no, this is, hey, it's all good. Yeah. This is what we do, and you're able. It brings that personal side of the rescue, right? Because we don't have very much. We got trunks on and some fins. Yeah. You realize, and we're putting our body in there to get another body out, right? Like it's as basic as it comes, as far as your tool is you. Yeah. That you're utilizing for the extrication of someone out of the ocean, and to personalize that tool, and to get that, now this is just another human, right? And you can get that feedback. I think it's so important, and to see that a lot of those things is, hey man, that's just totally cool. It's what we do, and it's all good, and not just that, but hey, we're glad you're here. Yeah. Still, and everything, it turned out well, right? So, no, I think once again, but that goes both ways. Those guys are getting feedback from you. You're giving them feedback, they're giving you feedback. And it's a very rare instance, and like just reiterating, for them, that was one of the first time, if not the first time, that they got a confirmed thank you and a confirmed feedback on this critical rescue, which they didn't know the same thoughts that you were having, which was, man, I thought I was almost going to die, basically. Right. And it can get lost in those numbers of once they each did several rescues that day. Yeah. So it's cool to build on that. Absolutely. As we're kind of getting towards the tail end of here, because we've kind of hit all the points that I was thinking of, and obviously you've had this insight and this constant reflection on it. Is there anything that you want to share just kind of globally with people, advice or tips or things that just overall as a broad strokes, or let's say you were giving advice to your kids or someone that, let's say your friends that were there at the beach that day, or anything that you've learned from this besides what you've already said, anything that you would want to share that I haven't asked you about yet?
Yeah, I mean, definitely kind of the thing I go to a lot is if you are going to the beach or a pool, like find where the lifeguard is. Even if you don't need them necessarily right away, there could come a time where you want to be near them. You want to be in eyesight. Another thing is also just really listening to, sometimes they kind of have the copter coming by or they have the truck coming by and they're giving announcements, whether it's about, the waves are really strong, we're asking people to get out of the water, or, be vigilant or something like that. So I think like sometimes people just kind of hear and they're like, yeah, that's fine. We're going to keep grilling, or we're going to keep, doing our food, and we'll go in later. But I think it's like, no, listen, like they're not just there to like tell you to do whatever they want. They're like, they could be, the difference between life and death, basically. So I think if anything, and just moving forward, I'm like, you have to take it seriously. There's no room for, to be wishy-washy about it.
Yeah, and what you're alluding to is awareness, right? Simply being aware, hey, this is their workplace. They know what's going on. They're spotting the rip currents and looking. Our entire purpose is that people show up to the beach and go home safe without anything happening. And when we do our jobs right, everyone goes home safe and nothing happens. They think, oh, I had a great day at the beach. Not, wow, the lifeguard was, kicking butt, telling everyone to move and this and that, because they are grilling or they're hanging out or they're at a birthday party, whatever it is, right? You don't have that awareness of it. But yeah, hey, I mean, you're walking into this wild territory, this dynamic environment that's constantly changing from morning to night, the wave difference and the height of the, not just the wave height, but the tide and the way the sand shifts. It's all dynamic and moving. And that's what we are trained to give to the public. But if the public needs to listen, right? They need to take that in for sure. And, I mean, what an incredible, and just a huge, shout out to the Newport Beach Lifeguards for that day, because I remember specifically, I mean, there was several non-fatal drowning events that day. There was a lot of, just once again, in quotation, standard rescues that they performed. And the stats that I posted with them on the Instagram and everything, but that was just a truly exceptional day of lifeguarding, and the fact that they were able to manage all of that. And everyone did go home safe at the end of the day, within reason. I mean, that it just speaks to the professionalism there, the training, the attentiveness, and what all those guys and gals are doing. But and once again, thank you for being open to that. I mean, that is a huge ask from you, and this is probably the third time I bugged you for some kind of official interview. But man, let me tell you, I mean, and we'll stay in touch, as needed. But people will listen to this, and it's a very insightful perspective. Simple. It's not too complex. I mean, we broke down a 10-minute thing that happened at the beach. One of many across, if you look at, California, if you look at the world, right? But very rarely do we go back and break that down. And that's what I'm trying to do with the project. That's what I would hope that other people can now share their story too. But it starts with the fact that you are open and comfortable sharing that. And it sounds like it's been becoming this positive thing slowly as you obviously naturally progress through it. And so that's just so cool to see. And for me, once again, I mean, I'm still learning, right? And so this is a huge learning for me as well, just as part of this project of things that we can do and involve. And that's why the podcast is not just, lifeguards talking about other things, but this is part of lifeguarding right here, and having that, the other side of that perspective, which is totally vital. So, David, thanks again for doing that for us, and thanks again from those guys as well. I know they would, if they'll probably be listening to this later going, man, there he is. So cool. Anything else? Or
I mean, just I want to say thank you for giving us this opportunity, to connect. And it has been a very healing experience, as you said, and I'm glad that people will be able to take away their own, insights from our conversation with the lifeguards as well. But I'm just thankful to be a part of this and to be able to, share my story in hopes that I could help someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. Right on, man. Well, thanks, David. Right. Till next time.
Right, thank you.